Then it was time for the grand reception. Melvin led her into a lavishly decorated banquet hall that shimmered like a palace. Anita's eyes widened. It was more beautiful than anything she had ever seen. She felt like royalty when he pulled out her chair for her. The MC took the microphone and asked, "So, Mr. and Mrs. Grey, how did you two meet?" Before Anita could panic, Melvin leaned forward and answered smoothly, "We met at the market. I was there to buy, she was there to sell. In the end, we both stole something from each other, our hearts." The crowd laughed and clapped. Anita turned to him in surprise. Half of that was true, but he said it so convincingly that it sounded romantic, even magical. She was grateful he answered. She wouldn't have known what to say. Then came the moment to feed each other cake. Melvin held her gaze, smiled lovingly, and brought the fork to her lips like a doting groom. The cameras flashed. People sighed. To the guests, he looked madly in love. In truth, Melvin was carefully choreographing every move. He didn't let her drink any wine, suspecting she might not be able to handle alcohol. He wasn't about to let her ruin things by getting drunk and saying something stupid. Then came the first dance. He took her hand and led her to the dance floor. The MC joked that Melvin Grey was clearly obsessed with his new bride and didn't want to be apart from her for even a second. The music began. Romantic. Slow. Melvin placed a firm hand around her waist and pulled her close. At his quiet instruction, she wrapped her arms around his neck. They began to sway. All around them, fireworks went off, colorful lights sparkling in the sky. For a moment, Anita felt the entire world disappear. The music, the crowd, the tension, it all blurred. She felt safe in his arms. Then the tears started to well in her eyes. Melvin noticed. "What's the problem?" he asked quietly. "Nothing, sir," she whispered. "I just felt a rush of emotions. It made me a little emotional." He gave a faint smile, but his voice was warning. "Don't cry. Don't ruin this. You won't like the outcome if you do." Anita nodded and quickly pressed her face against his chest. She didn't want to ruin anything. She wanted the moment to last forever. But it didn't. Soon, the dance ended. The guests clapped and cameras flashed once more. The night came to a close. Melvin politely said goodbye to his guests and friends and led Anita into their suite inside the resort. The moment the door shut behind them, everything changed. The man who had just played the perfect groom vanished. His smile disappeared. His eyes turned cold again. He walked straight to the couch and sat down, pulling out his phone. Anita stood by the door, unsure of what to do. He didn't look at her. He didn't say a word. He just scrolled through his phone, reading news headlines, social media posts, and media reactions about the wedding. Thankfully, everything looked good. Pictures were going viral. Journalists praised the beautiful couple. The internet believed it all. He breathed a quiet sigh of relief. His face, however, ached from all the forced smiling. At least it was over. He looked up finally and saw Anita still standing awkwardly. "Take the bedroom," he said flatly. "I'll sleep on the couch." She blinked. "But sir, I wasn't asking for your opinion, Anita." His voice was hard. "The wedding planner stocked the bedroom with everything you need. I'll use the bathroom later. If you're hungry, there's food in the fridge. Stop standing there like a statue and leave my sight." Anita turned to go, but hesitated. She bit her lip and turned back slowly. "What now?" he snapped. "Are you deaf?" She shook her head quickly. "No, sir. It's just, I can't take the gown off by myself." He stared at her blankly. "What?" "It's tied at the back," she said softly, pointing at the intricate ribboned lacing. "I can't reach it." I need someone to loosen it before I can take it off." Melvin sighed and got to his feet. He walked toward her, stood behind her silently, and said in a low voice, "Let's get this over with." Melvin carefully untied the rope at the back of Anita's gown. His hands worked slowly, but his mind wandered quickly. He imagined a different scenario, one where Jasmine had been faithful to him, where she was standing in front of him instead of Anita, and they were laughing as he helped her out of her wedding gown. He imagined placing soft kisses on her bare back, running his fingers across her skin with love, not anger. His breath quickened. Realizing what was happening, he abruptly stopped. His hands left the ropes halfway undone, and without a word, he stepped back. Anita, thinking he had finished, waited. But when she touched her back, she realized the gown was still too tight. She turned and saw him walking away without saying anything. She watched in confusion. Melvin opened the door of the suite and stepped into the hallway. Just then, a woman he recognized, a business associate who had also booked a room at the resort, walked past and smiled at him. He stopped her. "Please, I'm struggling to help my wife take off her gown. Can you give her a hand?" The lady smiled. "Of course." She followed him into the suite. By then, Anita had gone into the bedroom and was standing with her back to the wall mirror, trying and failing to loosen the rest of the ropes. There was a knock on the door. "You can come in," Anita said, thinking it was Melvin. The woman stepped in and smiled warmly. "Your husband sent me to help with the gown." Anita stayed for a second, startled. "Oh, thank you," she replied, her voice soft. She turned around and let the woman assist her. Her heart skipped as she heard the words "your husband." They weren't real, of course, but hearing them still brought a kind of warmth she had never felt before. She couldn't stop thinking about why Melvin had left her gown halfway undone. But before she could dwell on it, the woman said, "All done. You can take it off now." "Thank you so much," Anita said with gratitude, walking her out. She locked the door, slipped out of the gown, and hurried into the bathroom. She didn't want to inconvenience Melvin if he wanted to use it next. Just as he had promised, there were pajamas and other clothes in the wardrobe, both for home and public outings. She knew he must have made the arrangements and felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. After changing into something comfortable, Anita opened the fridge and found it stocked with food and fruits. She ate some fruit and climbed onto the large bed, replaying the entire day in her head. The wedding, the kiss, the dance. She wondered if there was any way she could get a video or even just a few photos. She didn't have a phone, but she vowed that when Melvin paid her off in 6 months, she would buy one and search every corner of the internet to find clips from this day. That way, she could relive the most beautiful moments of her life, even long after she had disappeared from Melvin's world. Just then, she heard the door open. Melvin walked in. She panicked, closed her eyes, and pretended to be asleep. From the corner of her eye, she watched him move to the fridge, take out some fruit, and eat quietly. Then he began to undress. Her heart slammed in her chest when he took off his shirt, and then his trousers, until he was in just his singlet and briefs. Anita clamped her eyes shut, too afraid to watch. She didn't want to get caught peeking and incur his wrath. She heard him walk into the bathroom and didn't open her eyes until she was sure he had closed the door. Exhaustion slowly took over her body and she drifted off to sleep. Before dawn, he woke her up. "It's time to leave," he said gruffly. "Before people start waking up. I'm done keeping up appearances." Anita said nothing. She quickly got dressed, and they left the resort together. Back at home, she was headed toward her room with the wedding gown and accessories when Melvin's voice stopped her. "I want to make something clear, Anita." She turned around. Everything that happened today was for show. Don't get any ideas, he said sharply. You're my maid. That's all. In public, you'll act like my wife. But I do not recognize you as one. Don't forget your place. He stared at her coldly. If you value your life here, you'll make sure the next 6 months go by without drama. After that, I'll pay you off. And you'll disappear. Anita nodded slowly. I understand, sir. She turned and climbed the stairs, disappearing into her room. Melvin changed into a fresh suit and left for work. As soon as he was out the door, Anita sat on the edge of her bed and exhaled shakily. The warmth of the wedding was now a distant memory. Meanwhile, in a small guest house across town, Jasmine was glued to her phone. She had watched Melvin's wedding from the shadows, on blogs, live streams, and social media. Her heart thumped as she replayed clips of him kissing Anita, smiling at her like he used to smile at her. She clenched her jaw, livid. It makes sense now, she whispered. That girl, that Anita. She was always on my side, pretending to be loyal. But she stabbed me in the back and took my man. She stood abruptly, her fingers curling into fists. I treated her well. I showed her mercy, she screamed. And she betrayed me, took the life that was meant for me. She paced the room, seething with rage. No one takes what's mine and walks away freely. I'll make sure of it. Her voice dropped to a chilling whisper. Anita, I will ruin you, even if it's the last thing I do. Anita waited for Melvin to return from work. She had spent the entire day thinking about the wedding, and especially the kiss. It still felt like a dream. Her lips tingled every time she remembered it, and her heart would race whenever she closed her eyes to relive that moment. It was strange for her. She had always hated when boys or men came too close. But with Melvin, it felt different. Perhaps it was because she respected him so much. Ever since he rescued her from the black market, she had begun to feel something toward him. At first, she believed it was just gratitude. But after everything that had happened, the way he defended her, took her in, clothed her, and stood by her at the altar, she knew now, it was a crush. She wasn't foolish, though. She knew her place. She was just a maid, and Melvin had made that painfully clear. No matter what had happened at the wedding, she was still just the billionaire's maid, and in 6 months, she would be gone. Still, she wished she had more time. But even if Melvin divorced her and allowed her to remain in his house, it would hurt too much to see him find love again and marry someone else. No, after the divorce, she had to leave. Quietly. She decided she would never let him know about her feelings. She would leave with good memories, and nothing more. After Jasmine's betrayal, Melvin had stopped smiling. He only pretended in public. At home, he was a different man, cold and wounded. Anita made up her mind. For the next 6 months, she would try to make him smile again. She would bring back the Melvin who had shown her kindness when the world turned its back on her. If she could do that before she left, she would consider her life meaningful. She decided to clean the entire house, something she hadn't done since the wedding. She found a bunch of keys in the cupboard and tried them on the doors one by one, cleaning every room she entered, including the one Jasmine had used and even Daniel's. When she got to Melvin's room, she hesitated. He hadn't given her permission, and she knew he'd likely be furious. But the room was dusty and disorganized, and she told herself it was her duty as the maid. She took a deep breath, entered, and cleaned it meticulously. Afterward, she bathed, crawled into her bed, and quickly fell asleep. At the office, Melvin's presence surprised everyone. He had just gotten married the day before. Even the most dedicated workaholics would take a few days off for a honeymoon. He received congratulations from many, But behind his back, whispers filled the corridors. Some employees even asked him directly why he wasn't on a honeymoon. He didn't respond. What Melvin didn't know was that a paparazzo had secretly followed him and taken pictures of him entering the office. Hours later, the media exploded. Trouble in paradise. Why did billionaire Melvin Grey return to work a day after his wedding? People began speculating. Maybe his bride was just for show. Maybe there was already a rift. Jasmine saw the headline and burst into tears. If he married me, the woman he actually loved, he wouldn't be at work. He would be with me. He can't even stand that girl. That country rat must have forced herself on him. Behind her, Daniel watched. He saw the article and noticed her tears. "Are you crying because you miss Melvin?" he asked coldly. Jasmine wiped her tears and faked a laugh. "Of course not. I'm just furious. That little cockroach, Anita, outsmarted me. She's nothing, and now she's his wife." She turned to Daniel, her eyes bitter. "Do you know what this means? She could inherit everything if something happens to him." Daniel sighed and sat beside her. He kissed her cheek and whispered, "Don't cry, Jasmine. I'm already working on a plan. A very good one. When the time comes, I'll tell you everything. Just be patient, and trust me. We'll take everything. And neither Melvin nor that pathetic little wife of his will be able to stop us." At that moment, Melvin was still at work, until he saw the headline on his phone. Trouble in Paradise. His blood boiled. He hated being the subject of gossip, especially false gossip. He realized the paparazzi were still tailing him. That meant he had to be more careful. He decided not to return to the office for a few days and work from home instead, but not right away. He didn't want to return to that house. Not yet. There were too many memories of Jasmine there, and the walls still felt suffocating. He left work, drove to a secluded spot, and parked. His windows were tinted, so he felt safe inside. Eventually, he closed his eyes and unexpectedly dozed off. When he woke up, it was already past 11. He cursed under his breath and drove home. He thought Anita would be asleep by now, but she had been pacing all night. She didn't have Melvin's number, otherwise she would have called. Instead, she sat in the living room waiting anxiously. The moment he stepped through the door and saw her, he exploded. "What the hell is this? Why are you waiting for me?" Anita jumped to her feet. "Did I ask you to do that? Do you think that standing in for Jasmine on our wedding day gave you the right to act like her? Should I remind you that you'll never be more than my maid?" She shook her head quickly. No sir. Don't get on my nerves. Get out of my sight." Anita turned and fled up the stairs to her room. Melvin glanced at the dining table. The food smelled good, and he was hungry. He had barely eaten anything all day, but his pride wouldn't let him touch it. He marched upstairs, heading for his room, ready to collapse, but the moment he stepped inside, he froze. His room was spotless. The bed was made. His desk was tidy. Even the bathroom had been cleaned. He knew exactly who had done it. His jaw clenched. "You have got to be kidding me." He stormed out of his room, went to Anita's door, and kicked it open. She jumped up from her bed, startled. Her eyes were red. She had been crying. The moment she saw him, she stood up, hands trembling. But Melvin stopped. He stared at her for a moment, then turned to leave. But Anita ran after him, still crying. "Please, sir, I want to explain. I know I made a mistake not telling you about Jasmine and Daniel. I was so scared. She threatened me. She said you'd never believe me, that you'd kick me out." She paused, sobbing. "I know I was wrong. I've regretted it every day. That's why I stayed away. I felt ashamed. But I never meant to hurt you. You saved my life. I owe you everything. Please, just forgive me." Melvin didn't turn. He stood in silence for a few long seconds. Then he said quietly, "Since you're willing to do anything I ask, I'll make one request. Don't ever enter my room again." And with that, he walked away. Anita stood there, her heart breaking all over again. She closed her door and wept silently into her pillow. Melvin went back into his room and sat on his bed. He thought about what Anita had said and sighed deeply. Perhaps she had been right after all. If she had told him about Jasmine and Daniel's affair the very moment she found out, it would have been her word against Jasmine's, and he'd been with Jasmine for over 2 years. She was someone he trusted, someone he had planned to build a life with. Meanwhile, he hardly knew Anita at the time. In fact, if Anita had dared to tell him back then, he probably would have believed Jasmine, accused Anita of jealousy or lies, and sent her packing. Or worse, Jasmine might have made her life so miserable under his roof that she'd have no choice but to leave. That betrayal could have been buried even deeper, and he might have ended up marrying a woman who was already betraying him. He recalled how Anita had stayed hidden in her room during those weeks, how she avoided his eyes, how her hands trembled when she served him water. The signs had been there, but he was too distracted to notice. In truth, he hadn't been fair to her. If it weren't for Anita, he would never have discovered the truth. He would have walked into a doomed marriage and handed his life over to 2 traitors. He decided then that for the remaining 6 months of their contract, he would treat her better. She had suffered enough. The least he could do was not add to her misery. When Melvin woke up the next morning, he decided to work from home. The media storm after the wedding had left a sour taste in his mouth. The photos, the gossip, the headlines, cold feet, billionaire groom returns to work alone. He hated all of it. Thanks to Jasmine, his wedding had become a public spectacle. And now, even his silence was being dissected. People were watching him, judging his every move, speculating about his personal life. He set up his laptop in the living room and got to work. Upstairs, Anita woke with a heavy heart. She couldn't forget how harshly Melvin had spoken to her the night before. He had made it clear, again, that she was just a maid. She never expected him to treat her like a wife. But she didn't want him to hate her either. All she wanted was to take care of him, to make his life a little easier during their 6 months together. She waited for the sound of his car. Maybe he had gone to work already? But the house remained silent. Curious and very hungry, she freshened up, dressed, and finally crept out of her room. As she descended the stairs, her heart dropped when she saw Melvin in the living room, working. He looked up just in time to see her, but before he could speak, she turned around and darted back upstairs. He blinked, then chuckled quietly. What the hell? His stomach rumbled. He hadn't eaten properly in almost 24 hours. He glanced at the tray of food still sitting cold on the table from the night before. He couldn't eat it now, it was stale. And he had no interest in reheating leftovers. Upstairs, Anita clutched her chest, trying to slow her heart rate. That was too close. Why was he still home? Was one of his cars faulty? Had something happened? More importantly, what was she going to eat? As she tried to think, she heard her name. Twice. Her eyes widened. He's calling me. She hesitated, then slowly crept back down the stairs. He was watching her as she descended. Her heart thudded in her chest, especially when their eyes met. "Good morning, sir," she said softly. "Good morning, Anita," he replied. "How was your night?" She stared at him in surprise. "It was fine, sir." She stood there nervously, fiddling with her fingers, trying not to gawk at his long fingers or the chiseled features of his face. "I'm hungry," Melvin said. "Can you please make breakfast?"